Good afternoon. Thank you so much for attending the Ann Arbor District's National Disability Employment Awareness Month. Our presentation today is Disability and Employment, the Impact on Hispanic Communities in Michigan. And this is presented by Karen Flores, Juan Martinez, and Michigan Rehabilitation Services. My name is Shanti Bailey. I am the Ann Arbor, Michigan Rehabilitation District Manager. Before we introduce our first speaker, I'd like to go over some housekeeping. Please exercise patience, especially with technology. Zoom should default to live transcript, but you can go to the live transcript button to either access or hide subtitles. There is also an option to view the full transcript. There is a designated time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. And to ask a question in the Q&A, press the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom interface and enter your question. Captioning is available by pressing the closed caption button inside the Zoom application and choosing Show Subtitles. Our first speaker today is Karen Flores. Karen is a Michigan Rehabilitation Services vocational rehabilitation counselor out of the Adrian office, and she's been working with us since 2022. She obtained her master's in social work from Spring Arbor University. Karen, we are so happy to have you. Go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Shani. Hi, everyone. Well, I was invited here today to speak a little bit about my experience as one, a Hispanic with a disability, and also my experience as being a DACA recipient. For those of you who don't know what DACA stands for, it stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and it was passed back in 2012 by Barack Obama. I was actually one of the first DACA recipients here in Lenawee County. When you have DACA, it doesn't necessarily grant permanent residency status here in the United States, but it does allow kids who are brought here as children to receive a Social Security and a work permit to be able to obtain legal employment and also apply for colleges and not have to get charged as out-of-state tuition and so on. So I was brought to the United States when I was 2 years old. So I was originally born in Mexico and I was brought here when I was 2. I have lived here in Adrian for the majority part of my life. So I attended high school here. I attended college close to here and everything. So luckily for me, I graduated from high school in 2012, and that's when DACA came into action. So I was able to obtain a Social Security number and a work permit. So with DACA, you have to renew every 2 years, you have to pay the fees, and it's basically allowing you to keep a work permit valid. I had also been in the process of obtaining permanent residency since 2001. So I ended up meeting my husband in 2017 and we got married in 2020. I was luckily able to become a permanent US resident about 6 months later after we got married. So now I'm in the process of becoming a US citizen. So hopefully that is in the works for next year. So it's been a long process. Basically, if it wouldn't have been for my husband, who was a US citizen, I would still have an open case with Department of Homeland Security. And that's since back in 2001. So the process to become legal in this country is very, very, very long and very, very expensive. I was diagnosed with stage 5 kidney disease back in 2018, which made it difficult because on top of having to pay for my education out of pocket because I did not qualify for any financial aid, I wasn't allowed to apply for a lot of different grants or anything like that because I wasn't documented. It was difficult. So I paid my bachelor's and my master's degree out of pocket. So just when I thought I was done with having to make all of these payments, I unfortunately got diagnosed with the kidney failure. I was blessed enough to not have gone through the dialysis or anything. And I was fortunate that because I was employed, I was able to have private medical insurance. So that's kind of how I was able to navigate my health journey as far as treatment goes and working with the transplant clinic up at University of Michigan and so on. I did receive my kidney transplant in 2019 by a person I did not know at the time. We're very close now. Um, and then when my husband and I got married in 2020, it obviously was just life changing for me because not only did I get granted permanent residency to be, I guess, considered legal here in the country, but it also opened up a lot more options for me when it comes to medical treatment. Being a transplant recipient, I have to be on lifelong medication to help keep my kidney. I have a lot of follow up appointments with the kidney transplant to make sure that everything is stable. And then, of course, admissions, hospital admissions is needed, and so on. So, personally, for me, it's medical treatment is very, very important. Um, Trying to think. And I think that's just a brief synopsis of what it's been like for me throughout my journey as both a Hispanic with disabilities and also as a DACA recipient.
Karen, thank you so much for sharing your story. Can you talk to us just a little bit um about the intersection of being Hispanic with the disability? How has that been for you? Just a little bit, please.
So for me, being a first gen immigrant, I guess, especially for my family, it's it's been it was hard growing up because I was basically like the child in my family who not only was I growing up, being independent for myself, but I had to learn how to be independent for my parents. So I remember just being so young and going to all of these, appointments with my parents, having to translate everything. And once it got to the point of having to attend college, I had to basically figure it out for myself because there was a lot of things I had to go through that most people here don't have to. So for one, when it comes to the education system, I had to find a way to be able to prove that I've lived in Michigan for most of my life because most colleges wanted to charge me as a foreign exchange student from out of the country, which was more money. When it comes to the medical aspect of it, when you're not documented in this country, it is very, very difficult to find help. Luckily for me, University of Michigan offers a lot of different programs that allow people who don't have legal status or people who don't have insurance receive treatment. I had previously been employed at the University of Michigan as a social worker as well. So I was fortunate enough to already come in with this knowledge of the different programs and services that are offered there. One thing I wish that I would see more frequently is programs or, different things open up to people who were like me, because at the end of the day, people who have DACA are working. So all of these people are employed and a lot of different things come up that we don't, that, there's necessarily no services to help on top of the fees that you have to pay to retain DACA and having to basically, um, you know, renew your license every time too. There's things everybody wants to do. You have to pay for school out of pocket. If you want to go into different trainings, you have to pay for all of that out of pocket. And it would just be nice to see, different programs that can be offered to the specific population. Because I know the big fight with DACA now has been to allow, these young people to obtain some type of legal status here. Because at the end of the day, it's just a never-ending cycle of having to renew work permits, trying to stay employed, and there's really no end result.
Awesome. And Karen, we do have a question. I think you kind of touched on it. And I don't, do you know what the current status of the DACA program is?
Yeah, so it's been since 2016, I believe, when Donald Trump came in to become president, that DACA had a huge change that year because a lot of new applicants were not permitted, and that has not changed since then. So currently, anybody who was able to apply from DACA, basically from the start, so 2012 till about 2016, are all the people who are in the program and are able to renew their applications every 2 years. It's unfortunate that it's kind of been stopped for that long because there's so many young people now who meet the eligibility requirements for DACA, but because no new applications are being accepted, all of these people are basically either working under the table. A lot of them have put their education on hold. A lot of them haven't been able to start their education journey, and a lot of them are having, a lot of different issues such as mental health, um, medical, and so on, just because it's like living in limbo is very difficult. So, mental health, when you're in DACA, is very mentally draining and it's a very emotional process, especially because you're basically living every single day not knowing if DACA is even going to exist next year. And a lot of these people are around my age, so 29, 30, over than 30. They have families, and obviously they fear for not only their safety, because on top of that, DACA is kind of a protection from deportation. And a lot of those of us who qualify for DACA, we were brought here as kids, so we never really had we necessarily didn't make the decision, to be here. But a lot of us don't look at it as a downfall, because if it wasn't, for our families making that decision for us, a lot of us probably wouldn't be where we are now, because we all know those of us who are here have a better life.
Awesome. And I just have one more question. I mean, you spoke about this a little bit earlier about majority of the doc of people who currently have DACA, they are currently employed in some capacity. Did you experience any difficulty in becoming employed? And if so, what advice would you give to people who are working with DACA recipients who are looking for employment?
Honestly, I had no difficulties from the minute that I got DACA. I luckily had been trained in dental assisting, so I immediately got a job working as a dental assistant. And it was those of us who are in DACA are just such a benefit because we're bilingual. So employers want that, especially the way, our society is heading now. Everywhere you go, a bilingual person is almost needed. So those of us who have those of us who have DACA or had DACA almost all become employed because simply of that reason of being bilingual. It's a small percentage of us who actually go on to obtaining, a bachelor's, a master's, but those of us who do have a degree to that extent are hired. Um, so it's crucial.
Awesome. Karen, again, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. It is greatly appreciated. And thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. We really, really appreciate that.
Thanks, Shani.
All right. Now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing you to Juan Martinez. Mr. Martinez graduated in 1972 with a master's degree in social work with a focus on anthropology. He is currently the assistant to the director at the Michigan State Extension. Mr. Martinez has served on the Hispanic and Latino Commission of Michigan from 2015 to 2021. He is a board member of Latino Leaders for the Development of Advocacy and Development from 2019 to present. He was on the Michigan State Advisory Board to the Sustainable and New Immigrant Small Farms Program from 2003 to 2010. He served on the board of directors for Heifer Immigrant Farming Initiative from 2000 to 2001. He was also on the board for Latino Farmers and Farm Workers from 1999 to 2008, and he was asked to present at the Food and Society Conference on the increase of the Hispanic population in the rural U.S. This was a Kellogg Foundation sponsored conference. And last but certainly not least, he worked for the USDA Secretary of Agriculture, Dan Glickman, as the National Program Coordinator on the farm workers and obtained and distributed over $20 million to farm workers who have been negatively affected by natural disasters. Without any further introduction, I'd definitely like to introduce you to Mr. Martinez.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Sri, and also thank you for the invitation. I hope I will meet some of your expectations to the participants. I just a very slight correction. I am no longer employed. I am retired. I retired from Michigan State University the office of the director. I'm going on 11 years. So it was an excellent career. Some of the accomplishments were mentioned. I was fortunate to have the opportunity to do that. And so when Irene Solis invited me to have a presentation, I said, I've never really have had an opportunity to work with the disabilities, except that I was recalling as the previous speaker was talking, that for the first time, I think it was in the mid 80s, a program was launched for farmer disabilities to find programs that would assist farmers with disabilities. As you know, because you're in this field, agriculture and mining probably have the highest incidence of injuries, from losing a hand to losing an arm to losing a foot, and on and on and on, as well as mental issues. So that's when my first contact was with the disabilities program. We promoted it in MSU Extension to let farm producers know that this was available. Although at that time, and I don't know if it's current, but farm workers were not particularly eligible or perceived as eligible for some of the programs. That might have changed. As I said, I haven't been at it for a while, but it occurred to me that in Michigan, we have about 80,000 farm workers that come to Michigan. And the primary reason is the diversity of agriculture in Michigan. We are second to California in terms of hand harvested field crops in Michigan. It's our agricultural GDP is around $104 billion. It was in 2020. So so it's typically agriculture either is first or second in the economy in the state of Michigan. So that's the primary reason why so many persons come to work in agriculture, in hand harvesting. And when the question was raised about Hispanics as Hispanic Heritage Month, I'd like to take you back a little bit and have you recall, some of you may recall or may not recall, which was the first declared war the United States declared against. I won't wait for an answer, but I'll just tell you it was Mexico. And the conclusion of the end of that war was in 1846. At the conclusion of the war, the United States became basically the new United States, expanded from east of the Mississippi all the way to California, and parts of Oregon. So it took in the states of California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Utah, parts of Kansas, Colorado. So it doubled the size of the United States. Following those conflicts, and then were followed. The United States followed with what we would call the Indian Wars. Again, predominantly in the West and in the Southwest. And then in the late 1800s, the second declared war of the United States was against Spain. Some of you may remember your history books. The famous quote was "Remember the Maine," and that took place as you know, in Cuba. Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders, going into San Juan. And at the end of that conflict with the United States, basically, this would have been in the late 1800s or 1890 something, the United States became an empire. The United States still doesn't like to talk about an empire, or that it is an empire, but it basically is. It as it and so it took the territories of both Mexico and Spain and Native Americans, and it became the United States of America, quotes. In that process, believe it or not, I was reading another book. When that occurred, it impacted the way in which the United States took census, because now you had more people of color that we refer to as color in the United States than you had Europeans. And so the census did not count these populations in their official census counts. And it made countries like Puerto Rico, Cuba for a while, because Cuba was part of the United States, the Philippines, Guam, the Samoans, all the Pacific Islands that were Spanish territories became territories. And today, even today, they're US territories. Puerto Rico is a US territory. Philippines was no longer a territory. It declared its independence and it fought for independence. The United States had a war against the Philippines. And then Guam is still a territory. So when I started to read and think of the United States, I stopped looking at the United States from the Pacific to the Atlantic, because it's really much bigger in terms of acquisitions and land, that it purports that it's part of its dominion, quotes, to use that term, dominion. So I find it sometimes interesting to say Hispanic Heritage Month, when before the United States as a colony, Spain was already here 170 years before the British colonies came into the Northeast, before Jamestown. And so the second most spoken language in the hemisphere is Spanish, and including the United States. The present population of the United States is 65.5 million in 2020. Now, as some of you may remember or had read or saw on your newscast, that the former administration ended up shutting down the census count almost several months ahead of time. So basically, it didn't really finish the census the way it should have, even though there were a lot of problems with it. And one of the things that this last administration attempted to do was to insert a question: are you a citizenship question? As Ms. Flores pointed out to you, being a DACA, it was already hard enough that people were giving information, and DACA students who apply for DACA status have to give really detailed information. It was a big concern because people were concerned of deportation. So the census had the same effect. The question failed. It went to the Supreme Court. It did fall. It did not pass through. But basically, the damage was done in terms of getting people to fill out the census forms, because they were afraid if they put in information that the census request, could that be a data point whereby ICE could go and collect this data and then round up people who were here as undocumented. And so therefore, I know the 65.5 million is a solid number for census, but I have my druthers. But that's the only figure that you can really back up, is the 65.5 million. Now, for 2030, already Hispanics are the largest ethnic population in the United States. By 2030, it will definitely be the largest ethnic population. It'll probably, I'm guessing here, this is a guess, an educated guess, around probably between 75 and 80 million in the United States. That will make the United States probably Mexico #1 in terms of the largest speaking speaking country or Hispanic country, Spanish speaking country, then probably then Argentina comes in, and then probably the United States will probably be the third largest Hispanic state in the hemisphere. So it's not inconsequential of the growth of this population. One of the points that I'd like to make here, that it's difficult. It's not difficult for me. For me, it's not difficult, but for a lot of people who don't deal with this topic or the subject matter, they perceive, because of immigration and the way immigration has been politicized so badly, that if you're Hispanic, you just got here yesterday. You just arrived yesterday. And so, for example, Mrs. Flores would fall into that category of a new, recently arrived individual, a family. While I look at our family, and we're like now fifth generation. My wife is 13th generation. And so the spectrum is really wide. It's very, very wide, of persons who are claim being Hispanic and also claim United States as their country. As I mentioned to you before, the very common terminology that a lot of Mexican Americans, and particularly reference, is the border crossed us. We did not cross the border. And basically, what I was in the reference that I made prior was the expansion of the Mexican War in the United States and the Spanish War in the United States. It doubled the size, the landmass of the United States. So that is some context for this. And then in reference to persons with disabilities, it also, what comes to mind is that there's also a spectrum in by which a lot of, I'm referring to more Mexican Americans, as that's the biggest bulk of ethnic population within the United States. Puerto Ricans are the next largest population in the United States, and then Central Americans, Guatemala, Honduras, and then Cubans, and then South America. So it is a spectrum of let's say, I refer to them as clans of Hispanics who are members of these different other clans, but they're still under the umbrella of Hispanics. But this population, we range from having inherited cultural in native indigenous remedies or healing that is typically referred to as in Spanish, curanderismo, meaning that somebody has been given a gift for healing, up to the latest individuals who will also access the most modern healthcare services that the country has to offer. So it's a wide range of people's interest and knowledge of health programs and health services within the country. And so I'm positive that as you confront, or you deal, or you enhance and make inroads with this community, you will see some of that. You will see individuals. I mean, I remember growing up, if somehow I wasn't feeling well, I was feeling weak, I was lethargic, I wasn't doing this. One famous healing that was done to me when I was a little boy was the overlay of an egg, curing you with an egg. And so the idea was that if the bad properties in your body would go to the egg, they would be removed from you and go to the egg, and then the egg would be buried. And so therefore you removed any bad properties in your body. And so the diagnosis of whatever was happening was very superficial diagnosis. And so and as I said before, going to a clinic, going to a hospital, going to emergency is also there. But one of the things that happens, as Mrs. Flores mentioned, that many, especially many, I'm saying second and third generation families rely heavily on the children to do translating, not only translating in terms of language, but also translating the cultural practices of the broader culture of the United States. And what happens, because I was part of that, you basically end up losing your childhood. You become you rapidly or run into the adulthood very quickly because of the responsibilities that you're asked by your family and by the larger community as a whole. Because who else can you ask? And as a child, you're not going to let your family down or your parents down. You will do whatever is needed, but there are consequences to that. And uh, the other point that I'd like to address here is I'm very pleased that the program is trying to really be much more inclusive, to include the total population of the country. And it's not going to be easy. I mean, it's not a walk in the park to access these populations. I think if we were to go back up to 4 or 5 generations, Europeans would have been in the same boat. They would have come in with a lot of folk medicines, a lot of healing, especially in both Hispanics and the former Europeans. The persons in charge of health were the women. They were the healers of the community. They were healers of the family. And in fact, I attended a workshop on invasive species plants in this country and how they've gone rampant. And an individual researcher went back as far as looking at some of the plants that are now we call now invasive species plants were brought from Europe by women healers that were used for healing purposes in family. But that's been lost. I mean, that practices have been lost. What's left is the plants and the flowers that are left now in our environment. So it is not solely associated with Hispanics. It's very much associated with traditional cultural lifestyles. And today, one of the lifestyles that keeps a lot of that alive still today are Native American populations, believing in very traditional medicines. And so it's still that presence of culture is still very much with us today. Are there any questions? I've covered a lot, but I don't want to just take over the mic and not address maybe a question or two that people may have.
So Juan, I definitely have some questions. You mentioned you went over quite a bit. And so one of the first questions that I have goes back to a statement that you made when you said we didn't cross the Mexican border crossed us. So
Correct.
my question to you is when we're working with members of the Hispanic and Latino population, the word immigrant, how do
Yes.
we know if that's offensive, or especially considering that the mindset is, I'm not an immigrant, I belong here, as so how, as professionals, how do we kind
You hit
of bridge that gap?
that's a really good, insightful question, because as Latinos, we see ourselves as migrants, not immigrants, because those who have studied archaeological history, the way this hemisphere gets populated is people crossing the Siberian Straits, going to what now would be Canada, and then populating the Americas, populating Mexico, Central America, South America. So people migrated. People didn't immigrate. And so that's a really good question. And I always tell people, no, we're migrants. My DNA, if I took my DNA, and I think if Mexican Americans took their DNA, they would be in the 62 to 70 some percentile of Native American DNA. That's very high. and, and so it answers your question that at times I get into a discussion, people ask me, because of the way I look, my profile is, where are you from? And I said, well, I'm from Okemos. No, where are you really from? Well, okay, I'm from Lansing. No, where are you? So where are your parents from? From Texas. No, where are you really from? So they want to push me back like to Mexico. I said, okay, I'll tell you my DNA story and I'll tell you my cultural story. Then I want to know your DNA story and your cultural story. Because in my DNA story, I live in my continent. I I reside here. And I think the other added to that, Sherry, is that Mexicans have never obtained the status of refugees. Never. Other populations, other groups that have come to the United States have come in as refugees and immigrants, but Mexican Americans, Latinos have never, and Cubans were the only ones that obtained that status of refugees. But Mexican Americans have never been given that status of refugees. So it's a really good question. It's a very good professional question, and how you approach potential clients, is to have that in your mind, and then at least some understanding of it. Nobody has a thorough understanding of it, but that you are from here, and that's what the concept of the border crossed us, says it all for us. For us, it says it all.
All right.
Thank you
So
for
then
the
my next
question.
question goes back to the idea of disability in the Hispanic and Latino culture. I think you were speaking about passing it to the egg, and the egg, gets rid of the, so
Right. All the
how
evil
can
demons.
all of the evil demons. Can you talk and talk a little bit about how disabilities are seen in the Hispanic and Latino culture? And again, how, there's a stigma regarding disabilities in everybody's culture, right?
Correct.
It's
Correct.
so what is the best way to address that when we're working with Hispanic or Latino customers?
Well, I'll give you some generalizations. I'm not going to say that these are documented or they're scientific, because they're not. But one, if the family is very religious, has a very strong faith, that if an individual is born with a disability, somehow that gets interpreted that, your ancestor or you committed some bad act, or you can have some action, and so this is your cross to bear. You will bear this cross. The child that is born or whatever, there's your cross to bear. And so you those who respond positively, respond with a lot of love and care, and personal, especially the women, with a lot of personal love for that individual. They're not ostracized. They're not seen as bad. It's just, uh, God, it's a gift. It's seen as a gift. And then the spectrum goes the other way around, where, this is not right. There's something wrong. We need to have this checked. We need to have professionals take a look at this, and then have professionals advise us on what we should do. And that's why I'm saying that the end of the spectrum, and a lot of it is also related to money. Do you have the resources to be able to go and access the professional health? It's a rough decision, especially when, families, you may have one income or two incomes, but the incomes are still minimum wage incomes, and you're meeting food, rental, utilities, school, some of the daily costs, and then to add another bigger cost in their mind. Okay, I'm talking in their mind, because they don't know that some of these programs don't have a cost related to them. And so you have to also educate that, hey, look, your taxes already paid for this. And you're a working family, your taxes are paying for the program. So don't feel like, it's a burden, or you're taking something away from the government. And because Mrs. Flores also mentioned, I think it stays in people's minds for a generation or two, that when you come in and you're going through the process of becoming a citizen, and the process can last from 16 to 20 some odd years, you cannot access anything, nothing, not one iota of what we perceive as government assistance. Because if you do, that will affect your process for becoming a citizen. Because the government will take it as a government dependent or dependency on government assistance, and you will not be given citizenship. So people strive really, really hard not to ask for any kind of public assistance of any sort. I'll give you an example. You mentioned the $20 million assistance that where I was able to work through the federal legislature, a declaration of under President Clinton, a disaster. Two small mayors, and what caused the disaster was a citrus freeze in California and Hurricane Andrew in Florida that hit Homestead, Florida, which is basically a farm worker community. And when I interacted with the mayors from Orange Cove, California, they came and said, look, Juan, we want some assistance, but we don't want any cash assistance. We don't want any kind of money. If there's any way that we can have commodities that we can bag, if it's beans, cheese, whatever, that we can give to our families, because that way they'll take a commodity, but it's not cash assistance because of their experience was in the previous disaster. They got financial assistance and people were deported because they were in line to get their citizenship, but having accepted disaster money got them off the line, booted them out. They said, we don't want to replicate, we don't want to redo this again. And so I was fortunate that I had colleagues here in Michigan who were in the Bean Commission. I called them, I asked them, I said, this is the situation in California. And they sent a rail car load of beans to Orange Cove for Michigan. So, I mean, because that way it wasn't money, it was commodity. So there's things that help. The government wants to help, but there's also things that it impedes. And so citizenship is one of those. And it applies across the board. Sorry for the long response.
No. This is very informative. And we have a question, which was actually, I was getting ready to ask. So we know that there is a huge stigma amongst Hispanic and Latino communities for working with the government, primarily because of the example that you just gave us, right? There is a huge distrust. And Karen spoke about it earlier about fear of deportation.
Right.
So the question that came to us is, and what advice do you have for professional groups like Michigan Rehabilitation Services who are government affiliated, and we want to reach out
Sure.
more effectively to first or second generation Hispanic families or to Hispanic communities.
Mm-hmm.
How do we do that? What advice would you give us? And how do we make that first connection?
Well, one is the way you website. I mean, everybody uses a website. So in your website, being very clear that any data you collect is not data that you're going to turn off to anybody. This is private, and that you keep track of that data. It's your data, and it's the constituency data. That's I mean, that would be one thing. I also think signage in bilingual Spanish signage, not extensive, but just to give persons that it's a welcoming, that you're being welcomed here, especially the first and second generations, I think is important. And I think if you have opportunities to make community presentations, is to go to community presentations, be it churches, social clubs, nonprofit organizations, and take the mic, and because I don't think a lot of people really understand you. I mean, the kind of services you provide, they're crucial services, and they're very badly needed services, and they're expensive services. So that would be my recommendation. And you need to hire more Floridas wherever you can, especially I just did with the help of the Commission on Spanish Speaking Affairs, and we hired a statistician demographer, and we did and it's if you go to the lead website, lead.org, lead.org, we broke down the Hispanic population by counties. And that's never been done before. And what we found out is that we have 83 counties, as you know, in Michigan. 71 counties had a Hispanic increase. Adrian is in the top 8 or 9 counties, cities and counties, Illinois, that had a Hispanic growth. So we think that Hispanics are predominantly in Southeast Michigan, which they are, and then Grand Rapids. Those are, like 50,000 some populations. But the population is pretty well distributed across Michigan. On a percentage basis, along the lakeshore, from let's say Sturgis all the way up to Traverse City, you're in double-digit percentage increase of Hispanics. The biggest county is on a percentage basis is Oceana County, north of Muskegon. They're in the 22, 24 percentile of Hispanic population. Again, driven by jobs and agriculture-related jobs. So the 2 counties who lost population was Luce County lost 6, and Alcona County lost 2. But there's still 60 some people in Luce, and there's like 40 some odd people in Alcona. So it gave me a new profile, a new way of looking statewide population. And they are becoming replacement populations for the former European populations who settled in Michigan, especially in the north and the Upper Peninsula. Those populations are declining and aging very rapidly, as you may know. So their average age for the former European populations in rural communities is 66 and above. And for Hispanic populations, it's 42. So it's a very young population. It's a very healthy population, physically healthy population. And when you're having to do physical work, that's a population you seek for employment. So I share that with you because it was really revealing to me that the Hispanic population now is a statewide population. The German population in Michigan had been the #1 ethnic population. Now it's Hispanics.
So Juan, let me ask you this. You started your presentation, your our talk about the fact that a lot of the Hispanic Latino members in Michigan, we have the largest, I think you said, hand harvested crops in America.
Correct.
So a lot of the population in Michigan does some sort of physical labor on
Correct.
farms. Is that safe to say?
That's correct. And if you look at and just to look at Lenawee County, because I know you could the transition when Lenawee County and Monroe County and parts of Toledo were heavy tomato, and Heinz and some of the tomato plants that some of the tomato companies that came in, they brought in braceros, and I'm now braceros was a World War II initiative on the part of Mexico to support World War II, and braceros means arms, brazos, and they provided over 1 million workers to come in and work across the United States. But in Michigan, they came in to work in agriculture, railroads, and foundries and manufacturing, because so many soldiers were going to fight in World War II. So there was a deficit of young people. And that's also when, if you recall, Rosie the Riveter, when women were also brought in to work in the industries in Michigan because there was a deficit. So those two things are going hand in hand. So the Bracero program ends in 1964. So it goes from 1944 to 1964. And so annually, millions of people were coming in and returning annually. So when that program ends, and then people from Texas are coming in to work. And you got families, farm worker families coming in, as whole unit families coming in. And so many of those families in Adrian came to work in the tomato fields, then migrated to the factories, and then migrated to the services, to the service sector, and now also migrated into some of the professional arenas. So you've had, it's all been work related, and I think if you talk to Irene or talk to Ben Negron, who you know maybe from Adrian, or Rudy Flores, who you all know, and say, what is, can you tell me your family story? And you'll see these chapters of and all typically related to work, all typically related to work. And Hispanics, if you excluded Puerto Rico, the island of Puerto Rico, have probably the lowest users of of um, of SNAP and some of the other family services. And if you look at the workplace, or where Hispanics in general, the big population of Hispanics, they are least represented in the public sector, and they're more represented in the private sector, working for private industry, working for businesses, and not as and they're not and we're not represented or not working heavily in the public sector.
So what I'm hearing, and this goes, I think you spoke about this, is that so as professionals, not that we present ourselves as a need-based program, but
Mm-hmm.
more so that we present this as this program is literally your tax dollars at work. And
Thank you.
so
Yeah,
this is, and by doing that, there's no shame that's attached to it with
correct.
participating. So we do have another question, and this is a great question. Um, would the Latino Hispanic communities be more open to listening to professionals from other ethnic backgrounds? So besides being affiliated with the government, are there cultural barriers that can be addressed to have them be more engaged?
So the first question, as I said before, we aren't highly represented in the public sector. And so the public sector is represented by more ethnic populations than ours. So it's kind of like normal that you'd expect that a non-Hispanic would be addressing you for this particular program. Is that I started MSU in 1967, and I had never met a Mexican American teacher, let alone a faculty person. And I met the first one at Michigan State almost my junior year. That was the first time I'd ever seen or heard. And I was like, you're kidding. You're kidding. Where, I mean, I wanted to engage. I wanted to know more. How did you do this? What are the things that I have to know? Da, 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 da. Because I'd never met one. It's a little bit more today, but still very, very low. And so even though we need professionals in all these branches, they're not there. And so to me, be open to being judged by your heart and your mind than by your color.
And that's a real that's a real answer. Thank you. We do have a comment. Someone stated that understanding the significance of Hispanic and Latinos arriving from diverse countries with distinct cultures is crucial. And so, could you weigh in on that statement? And is it okay to, because you made the statement earlier where somebody asked you, okay, where are you from? No, 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 where are you from? Is that ever okay to ask?
I ask that question myself, but I tend to couch it in, where's your ancestral country?
Okay.
Where's your ancestral place? Because it's, when you say where are you from, it's loaded. It's kind of a loaded question. And so I tend to refer to ancestral, and including Europeans. I mean, I ask that question to Europeans as well, because I sometimes am a little upset intellectually that using the term white and black destroys or eliminates your ancestral backgrounds. There's thousands of years of ancestry in these populations, and saying and narrowing it down to a color, you just, it's almost like you got rid of the thousands of years of ancestors. Africa has 52 countries, has hundreds of languages. And some languages, I mean, I was fortunate to go there on West Africa, and we had to have 2 to 3 translators to be with us because languages would change, like going from Adrian to Tecumseh. There'd be a whole other language, a whole other tribe. And so just for me, with my good, close African American friends, I said, you ought to invest in knowing more about you if you can, because you come from a really diverse continent. Africa is not a country, it's a continent. And so you need to really expand your thinking. And the same thing for Europeans. Europe is a continent, it is not a country. So if you're Irish or you're German or you're Czech or you're Norwegian or you're Danish, those are very different cultures, different languages, different origin stories, different accomplishments. And if you just say you're white, that what do you learn from that term? It's just like saying, well, I'm Hispanic. Well, the same thing. What do you don't learn anything? Okay, so you're Hispanic. Of which Hispanic group are you from? you know, because this continent is big, and when you look at the hemisphere, it's almost, I think it's either 34 countries or 37 countries that are represented. And there's just no way you can know all of that. There's just no way, unless you have a particular interest. But if the question has somehow, either for personal interest, I personally want to know, that's one thing, or it has an interest in terms of how do I deliver service to you? It has you need to contextualize it so that the person who's receiving the question can answer it better for you. I don't know if that helps.
Juan, it helps out tremendously. And while I have 50 million other questions, unfortunately, I just got a 2-minute warning. So I really, really just want to take this opportunity to say thank you so much for coming to speak with us. I personally found this very enlightening, and I have a lot of takeaways, and I'm already kind of developing some strategies to better engage. And everyone who asked the question, thank you so much. Juan, Karen, thank you guys so much for speaking with us. I'm going to share my screen briefly as we wrap this up. If I can figure it out. There we go. Uh-oh. Okay. So we did the wrap up and questions. If you would like any further information, you want to reach out to inquire about MRS services, please contact Joseph Uhas. His email address is right here. Again, this is the Ann Arbor District National Disability Employment Awareness Month event. The Ann Arbor District covers Washtenaw, Livingston, Lenawee, Jackson, and Hillsdale counties. If you have any questions regarding services in any of those counties, or you just want to receive further information about Michigan rehabilitation services, again, reach out to Joe Uhas at this email, or you can visit our website. Thank you all so very much for joining us this afternoon, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much.